Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. This episode is brought to you by my friends over at E-Residency of Estonia. If you're a globetrotting digital nomad, expat, freelancer, or somebody with a business, whether that's just you or an aspiring unicorn like some of the many other unicorns that have come out of Estonia, then look at E-Residency of Estonia the next time you're thinking about where to establish your business. E-Residency is a digital identity issued by the Republic of Estonia, which is in the European Union, to foreign nationals, that means non-Estonians, giving them digital access to the country's advanced online infrastructure and open business environment. And when I say advanced, I mean advanced. They've been doing digital for decades. E-residents can start a company 100% online from wherever they are in the world, run it remotely, open business bank accounts, and even submit their annual reports, all with their electronic ID card. It's literally international business without borders for location-independent entrepreneurs, perfect for the About Abroad audience. The next time you're thinking about where to establish your business, look at E-Residency of Estonia via the link in the show notes. Okay, now back to the episode. My guest today is David McKeegan. He is the co-founder of Greenback Tax, which is an expat-focused tax firm helping expats from the U.S. file their taxes back in America. But he's also an expat himself, currently living in Nosara, Costa Rica. So we go deep into Costa Rica, what the town's like that they're living in, how his kids are adapting to living there after they've already lived in places like Mendoza, Argentina, and Barcelona, and London, and Bali, and plenty of other places. They have traveled the world as a family, but are currently settled down in Costa Rica and loving life. So we talk a little bit of tax, a little bit of entrepreneurship, a little bit of expat life and digital nomad visas. We get into a bit of it all during this discussion, and I really enjoyed picking the brain of one of the entrepreneurs that I really respect in the expat world because I am an customer of their service. So it was really fun for me to get him on the show. I hope you guys will enjoy this one as much as I did. Please help me in welcoming David to About Abroad. David, buenos dias. Welcome to About Abroad.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I'm a longtime Greenback customer, a happy Greenback customer. So to have you on the show, sharing the story behind the company and even in more detail your story, I think is going to be a lot of fun. So let's start with, for the audience that they might not know exactly who you are and what Greenback is. Can you give us a little background?
Sure. So my wife and I are originally from the States. We've been expats since 2002. And we originally moved over to Spain. We did our MBAs in Barcelona. And then from Barcelona, we moved to London, and we were working in finance in London for a bunch of years. One of the problems that we had a number of years in London was our US taxes. So if you don't know, the United States, North Korea, and Eritrea are the three nations in the world that tax their citizens when they live overseas. So we're in very good company, as you can tell. So the problem we were having was our accountant didn't really understand all the intricacies of the expat tax situation. And so we ended up having to amend some tax returns and just go through a whole rigmarole. And it was around the same time that the financial crisis was happening. My wife and I went on a vacation. We were in Croatia. We loved traveling. And we were sitting in Croatia saying, hey, you know what? Our life is pretty good, but it's not going to go the direction we want it to go unless we make a change. And we both had good paying banking jobs. We were pretty secure even with the financial crisis and everything. And we started kicking around ideas for a business we could start. And we thought, okay, we've got this problem personally with getting our taxes done every year. Why don't we tackle that? Why don't we see if that's something we can work on and fix that problem for ourselves, but also for other people? So I went back to my office. I was on a syndicated loan desk, and in the first half of 2008, I sold about £1 billion worth of debt. In the second half of 2008, big donut. There was no action in the market. So, our team was probably 15 people or something like that. And there's guys who were going out and getting remote control helicopters and, like little drones, flying them around the office, goofing off. I'm sitting there writing a business plan. I'm head down at my desk working on this business plan, from 9 to 5 every day. People are like, what are you doing? Like, nobody even has their computer on. Why are you sitting there, pounding away on your keyboard? And it was working on the original business plan, the original, idea behind what's now Greenback. And then I'd go home and Carrie and I would talk about it all night long. I'd go back in, I'd work on the revisions the next day and then bring it home. We'd review it together. And, that's how the idea came about. And that's how we started it. So what is it? Greenback is a company that helps Americans overseas get their taxes done. So, stay compliant on the U.S. tax front side, help advise people where and how they have to manage their taxes, because it's a different situation when you go outside the U.S. and nobody tells you what to do. We can get into the weeds of that more if you want to, but there's a lot of pitfalls that people fall into if they're not careful.
Yep. Yeah, it's 100% true. I can attest to this. I've lived in a handful of countries now and 4 years here in Spain where I currently am. And this is something that never ceases to amaze me how challenging it is, because it's something every single person technically has to do every single year and all around the world. And there's millions of us expats living abroad. And yet it is still a relatively painful process, especially I always tell people, like, if you imagine you hate dealing with the IRS, right? Well, imagine doing that with 2 governments or maybe 3 governments if you own properties in different countries. Like it gets messy really, really quickly. What I love about your story, though, is that it's born from like a real itch. Like you had an itch that needed to be scratched. You weren't satisfied with what was out there, and you guys rolled up your sleeves and built something for yourselves, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was multiple itches that we were trying to scratch, if I'm perfectly honest. You know what it's like living in Europe. You get pretty good vacation time, especially compared to the US, right? So when I was a banker, I think Carrie and I both had about 35 vacation days a year, which, we would tell people in the States that, and they'd be like, oh my God, that's amazing. And we were always like, wouldn't it be nicer if we could just take a bit more time off? Wouldn't it be nicer if we could do a bit more like deep travel, slow travel, all these kind of things. And, for us, the other thing that was another big driver in starting our company was we saw how other people were doing it in London, having kids and having to move to a different neighborhood, get into the right school, like all these kind of things. And we sort of thought, that's well and good, but that's not really what we want. We don't want to have to hire a nanny to take care of the kids so that we can keep working, so we can afford the bigger house in the different neighborhood. And so that was another itch we were trying to scratch by starting our own business, is saying, we want a business that we can do from anywhere, and not be restricted in where we live or, how much or how little we work, things like that. We want to be able to choose our own destiny, if you will.
Yeah. And you guys have chosen that in a lot of different ways. You mentioned Barcelona, you mentioned London. You're currently in Costa Rica. Where else have you guys lived? I think there's a few other places on that list.
So the general way we did it was we went from New York, where we were living. We went to Barcelona. We did our MBAs there. We moved to London from Barcelona. We then went down to Brazil and Uruguay, and we spent about 9 months down there. We went back to the UK for 2 or 3 months, and then we packed up and we moved to Bali, Indonesia. We lived in Bali for about a year and a half, and then decided that we really missed steak and red wine, so we moved to Argentina. And we lived in Mendoza for about 9 months, and then we lived in Buenos Aires for about 9 months. And we actually, so our oldest son was born in the UK. Our second son was born in Argentina. And then we were living in Argentina. We had this nice little flat in Palermo, and we said, hey, in Buenos Aires, and we said, let's go back to Bali for a vacation. And, it was winter in Argentina. We're like, we need to go somewhere warm and sunny. So we went back to Bali, and, it was like the second day we were back in Bali. We walked down to the beach to have lunch, and, Timmy and Jake, our two boys, walked down to the beach, and they just started digging in the sand. Carrie and I had this great lunch sitting on the beach. And by the end of the lunch, we decided we were going to move back to Bali. So that afternoon, we walked around. We found another house in Bali. I flew back to Argentina, packed up our stuff, sold a lot of the furniture and everything, got back to Bali, and we spent another 5 years in Bali at that point. We had a third son. We actually had him in the US, but we were living in Bali at the time. And then from Bali, we moved to Costa Rica about, almost 3 years ago. And the main reason for that move was just to be a little bit closer to home. As our parents are getting older and things like that, we didn't want to be 27 hours away. We wanted to be more reasonable distance so that we could get back and see people more and stuff like that.
Gotcha. Wow, that is quite the adventure. Did I count correctly? Is that 3 kids on 3 continents?
Yep. There's no economy of scale there. You don't get any additional learning by having them in different places. You just have to figure out different medical systems.
You ever wonder in those situations, you're like, why did we do this to ourselves? Why didn't we just have one in the same place so we know how this whole thing works?
Well, it's funny. We have, between the 5 of us, we have 11 passports. So my joke is it's like Jason Bourne, the later years. It's like the whole family has multiple passports.
You don't know who you're talking to. Mission Impossible. I love it.
Which country are we going into? Like, which passport do I need here? Yeah. The negative is you have to renew twice as many passports, which
this can be problematic. This is the truth, though, isn't it? Like, there are a lot of that all sounds so fun. Everything you said, and I'm sure people listening are going, "Man, that's really cool. I would love to do that on some level or another." But it comes with a lot of challenges too, right? I mean, renewing passports is not like really a super easy thing, and paying taxes in multiple countries and finding rental properties and buying property and having kids and all the stuff that comes with being an expat isn't always super easy, but yet we continue to do it, right? And there's, I don't know if it's what it is. What is it for you? Is it wanderlust? Is it just the need to be in another place, or what resonates for you?
It's just, I guess you would call it wanderlust, but it's just that there's so many things in the world to see. And there's so many things that are interesting out there and beautiful and exciting that, once you start doing it, once you start seeing that, like, it's really hard to stop. And it's really hard to kind of unwind and say, like, I've seen so much of the world. I don't need to ever go back. I don't need to see it again. Like, I'm just going to stop traveling now. It's like, no, it's like, I want to go back to Rome and eat more tiramisu. I want to go back to Brazil and have some acai and go surfing and, do all these different things. And what I find is that the more you travel, the more places you go, and the deeper you get into them, the more places you want to go, because you start talking to people about what they're doing and where they're doing it. And, oh my God, this amazing thing happened. And it just, I don't know, for me, it just gets my mind on fire. And our whole family's that way, like, our kids are throwing out travel ideas that they read about in books and stuff like that. And My wife has a joke that we never remove things; we only add them to the list. It's an adventure.
It is. I can totally understand. How old are the kids? Like rough age? Are they young or are they in their teenage years or?
12, 9, and 7. We've got
Okay,
three little boys.
so they know they're aware. Like they're not toddlers. They're like we're living in a different place, and they're getting to experience the travels now as well.
Yeah, and like we were just on a trip. We went out to Lisbon and Rome, and the kids are kind of like, okay, where are we now? Like, it's like, okay, all right, and in our we've got a place in Connecticut as well as our place here in Costa Rica, and we've got this massive map on the wall in the kitchen. And whenever we're back there, the kids are sitting staring up at the map, and they're like, "Okay, I've been here, and oh, that's why that was such a long flight because to go from here all the way over there takes so much time." And so they're learning their geography through actionable events.
They are. Are they in school there in Costa Rica though? Is that or do you guys go back for the school year to the U.S. or what does that look like?
So when we were in Bali, they were enrolled in the Bali Island School, which is a IB school, International Baccalaureate School. We moved to Costa Rica and we picked this town called Nosara. It's on the Guanacaste Peninsula, which is, if you look at a map of Costa Rica, it's the little peninsula on the Pacific side. And we're about halfway down on the Pacific side. There is a school here. We started the kids out in the school here, and then COVID hit. And we said, the kids did about a year and a half at the school before COVID hit. And then we said, okay, we need to change this up. We need to come up with a different plan. So we used Oak Meadow, which is an online homeschooling course, and we got a curriculum from them. We hired a tutor down here to do a lot of the homeschooling with them, and we started doing that. And slowly what happened is other parents started having the same ideas, and they started saying, hey, this is well and good, but I met this person and they ran a school in this country and they want to start something down here, so they're going to do a project-based learning course. And so now there's a project-based learning curriculum that we do in addition to the Oak Meadow accredited program for the kids. And so we're kind of able to add things in here and there. And the kids, it's really interesting because I went through like the public school system in the U.S., went to public grammar school, public high school, went to college. My wife lived in Mexico as a child, so she went to a private school in Mexico, moved back to the States, went to high school in the States, and then college in the States. Our guys haven't really lived in the States. Like we'll go back over the summers, they'll go to summer camp in the US. That's like us teaching them how to be Americans, And
we're really indoctrinating you in the American way for 2 weeks a year.
Well, for our 7-year-old, it's all about the food. Summer camp is about food. But they learn how to play the sports and all that kind of stuff.
I love it. That's great.
So when we get here, it's a different situation. There are a lot of Americans here. There weren't a lot of Americans in Bali. And the homeschooling sort of gives them freedom and flexibility to do other things, to come up with other projects and things like that. So, for example, our 12-year-old is really into stock investing. He's been doing it for probably about 3 years now. His portfolio is worth nearly, I don't know, $3,500 or so. Wow. And he's doing it all on his own. So he's taking, his allowance, his tooth fairy money, like all this kind of stuff. And he invests this on his own. And I think in 2020, he had a 40% return. So far this year, he's at like 35 or 40% return. And so he's into it. He got his brothers into it. So he's telling people down here that this is what he's into. And two of the people that have like homeschool groups down here said, hey, would you mind coming and explaining this to students at our school? So on our flight down, on Sunday, He looks like a 12-year-old business traveler. He gets on, he puts on his headphones, he sets up his laptop, and he bangs out a PowerPoint presentation about how to invest. So, this is, again, this is what happens when you're outside of the box, right? You're not tied up in in the regular school situation where you're moving at the same speed and doing the same thing as everybody else. This is like allowing him to go deeper into something he's interested in. And he's learning all these different skills by doing it. You get a lot of math skills, doing some of the finance calculations. He's learning presentation skills. He's learning executive function skills, writing a presentation, talking to adults about, I can do it on this day or this day, things like that. And so right now, his plan is to do this presentation a couple times in a live group, get feedback for how it goes, then put it up on YouTube, see how that goes, and also start a finance podcast for kids. So basically trying to teach other kids like him how to invest and how to do that kind of thing. It's as a parent, it's really interesting and exciting just watching his mind light up doing some of this stuff. And as an entrepreneur, it's really exciting seeing that spark come out of him. It's like, I don't know how you teach it. I don't know how I don't know that you can go to school to learn that. I think it's more something that, if you're around it, maybe you catch it. It's more like the flu.
Yeah. I had somebody on the show earlier this season. He's the host of the Expat Money Show. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. Mikkel Thorup is his name. But it's,
I know.
So he was talking to me about this. He's just launched a online school for basically like International School of Entrepreneurship or something. I can't remember the name exactly. Something along those lines, very similar to what you're talking about. And we had an awesome discussion about this, how this idea of going down the same path, there's some parallels here, right? Between like expats and digital nomads, people living outside their home countries, sort of going down the road less traveled, a little bit outside the box, like you just said, and also entrepreneurs and teaching entrepreneurship and giving people this freedom, kids primarily in this case, giving them the freedom to kind of figure out what it is that they really want to focus on. And so seeing this happen with expat families and digital nomad families that are raising their kids this way, it's a pretty common thing that I'm hearing from them, is that their kids are kind of growing up thinking differently and coming up with new things that they're really excited about. And so I find that pretty fascinating that that's happening at the same time.
Yeah, no, I think we're at a really interesting point in history, because for the first time that I can think of, you've got a situation where most people can do their job from multiple locations. So, when we first started our business, we would talk to my father and my wife's father, and they were supportive of us. They thought we were smart and, would be successful and things like that. But they would say things like, I don't know how you run a business without a filing cabinet.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know how you can have a firm doing this kind of work and not have an office. Like, how does that work? And that was back in 2009. Like, I don't think anybody had coined remote first at that point. It was, there was a handful of people doing crazy things, and you didn't know whether or not you wanted to talk to them if you bumped into them at a cocktail party. And, where we are now is so many more people can do that. So many more people are able to, even take like a US based job and do it from anywhere that's in a similar time zone. So, the number of people moving to this little town we're in Costa Rica is going up dramatically, because all these people are like, I just said, forget it. I don't need to be in New York City or LA or anywhere in between. I want to be able to wake up in the morning, go surfing, and then I'll dial into my meetings after that. And the same thing is happening with the kids. The kids are realizing, hey, I don't necessarily have to be sitting in a school and sitting in a classroom for 6 or 8 hours a day in order to learn how to read, in order to learn how to do math, in order to learn science. There's other ways to do it. And for a parent, it's a little bit nerve-wracking, right? Because you kind of know what the path is to get into college. You go to grammar school, you go to high school, you get good grades, you study, you take the SATs, you go to college. That's kind of the path that my wife and I both went through. But then you look at what our kids are doing and you think there's got to be a value to this. Like somebody on the admission board of some college is going to say, we've got 4 kids from this prep school who all did this same thing. And then we got this other weird kid over here who's got 2 or 3 passports. He's lived in 15 different countries, and he's been running his own business for the last 6 years. That he started at the age of 12. Why don't we give that kid a shot? And that's kind of what we're taking a bet on, or thinking will happen, is that the people with the most interesting and broadest backgrounds are going to be the ones that are going to have the most opportunity in the future.
I think things will evolve along with this migration. I do think that what are the expectations and standards and things that are important today won't be for your kids. Like when you talk about college admissions, like for sure that process has to change, because so many more people will be living this way. So many more people will have these side hustles that they started when they were 12 by posting videos on YouTube or coding or whatever. And all of a sudden it will be probably much less important, like what your SAT scores were, for instance, or something like this, when you can say, look what I've actually produced over here. So I don't know how it'll change. I have not my area of expertise, but I just tend to feel like, it's sometimes hard for us to look 5-10 years into the future. Like I certainly couldn't have imagined 10 years ago, when I really wanted and craved location independence, but just thought it wasn't really possible, that, today I would just basically be talking about location independence all day, every day, because it's so prevalent. So it is really kind of mind blowing. So we'll see where it goes. I would love to hear a little bit more about this place in Costa Rica you guys are living in, because you've obviously lived in some great places. I mean, some of the places in the world that you guys have lived, Bali, Barcelona, London, I talked about Mendoza and Argentina. I mean, these are some of the most gorgeous places in the world. Presumably you could live wherever you want, and you've chosen this place in Costa Rica as a country, and then also this specific place there. So why Costa Rica? And then more specifically, why this location exactly?
Well, before we get to that, let me explain one thing that you might find interesting or weird. So a bunch of years ago, we came up with the idea that people need to feel like they have roots. They need to feel that kind of feeling. And so a lot of people we talk to are like, oh, how do you decide to move somewhere, things like that. And so we changed our definition of forever to being 1 year. So we can say, okay, we're going to move to Costa Rica, and people are thinking, oh my God, they're moving to Costa Rica forever. But in our minds, we say, no, forever is 1 year. And, you can live pretty much anywhere for a year. Like, we're not moving to bad places, right? So we moved to Costa Rica thinking, okay, we'll be there for at least a year, hopefully longer. Hopefully we'll like it, and it'll be a good place to live and everything like that. And got here, I think within about 3 months of being here, we decided to buy a house. And then we decided to renovate the house a little bit. And, we're in this little town where basically the jungle meets the beach. So this morning at 6:30, I took the kids down to the beach for their surf lesson. And our 2 youngest guys, so the 7-year-old and the 9-year-old, are out there, stretching out on the beach with a bunch of other kids from their homeschool group. And then, they all go out into the water, and there's one instructor for every 2 or 3 kids. And my wife takes the dog for a walk up the beach. It's like a 7-mile long beach. And it's literally, the jungle is hitting the beach, like along the whole 7 miles there. So it's magical. It's captivating. You see monkeys all the time. There's, hiking trails through the woods. And, if you look up, you'll see monkeys in the trees. And if you stand there too long, they throw their mangoes at you, that kind of thing.
If you're lucky, it's the mango that they're throwing.
Yeah, exactly. um, they just paved the road, like the main road, about a year ago. So we don't have a normal car here. We have a side by side, which, if you've never seen one of these, imagine like a quad bike, but the family size version. So it's got 6 seats, 6 seat belts. It's 1,000 cc's. It can go through, I think, 3 feet of water without the engine drowning out. All this kind of stuff. You can Google the Polaris Ranger crew is the one we have. A lot of the roads aren't paved. We've got potholes that could swallow a Volkswagen Beetle pretty easily, and it's a very back to nature kind of place. It's a small town feel. Like we know when our kids walk into town to grab a slice of pizza or something like that, that they're going to pass 2 or 3 neighbors, so you can triangulate where the kids are at all times. Things like that. And it was a really interesting experience through the whole COVID thing, because it's a tourist town, but no tourists could come for most of that. And so a lot of the expats that are here were the ones supporting all the restaurants and trying to keep things going as much as we could for people. And it was just, you got to know all your neighbors. You got to meet all these people who have done something cool and managed to get themselves down here. And there's new people coming all the time. So it's really a cool community.
We'll be right back to the show after a quick break for a note from our sponsor. This season is brought to you by my good friends over at Insured Nomads. They're the absolute best in the business when it comes to providing health, travel, and medical insurance for nomads, expats, and really just all forms of world travelers. I know insurance is often something that's overlooked when we're fantasizing about traveling the world, but it's absolutely necessity that we address this, because often the policy you have in your home country isn't going to cover you while you're abroad. And it's also a requirement, as a lot of people may not realize, to actually buy private travel or expat insurance, as it's called sometimes, to obtain a visa or even enter certain countries. So fortunately, there are companies like Insured Nomads to help us with this. Not only do they have excellent coverage and great prices, but they're also providing a first-class experience with additional perks and best-in-class technology via their app. It's an amazing experience. I can't recommend it enough. Now, this is a company that was built by world travelers for world travelers, so they know what it's like to find yourself in a difficult medical situation abroad, and they want to keep you from having that same bad experience. So the next time you're planning a trip abroad, whether it's for a week or a lifetime, check out Insured Nomads via the link in the show notes. Okay, now back to the episode. Sounds pretty idyllic. What's the ratio like, expats to tourists to locals? I mean, how does it? You know how every place you live kind of has like a vibe to it. Like it's dominated by expats, or it's dominated by locals, or it's just overrun with tourists. Like, and then some places are just a conglomeration of them all. Well, how would you describe this place?
It really depends on the time of year.
Yeah.
So, right now we're recording in November. It's mainly the expats that are here. The original plan for where we are was to be like an expat golf course community. And they never ended up building the golf course, but they did split out all the land and everything. And so it's a lot of expats living here. And then the next town over is where a lot of the local people live. So, where we are directly is mainly expats. But then what happens is around holidays and the peak travel season time, you get just floods of tourists. So, like for Christmas, like we're going back to the US, but there's just a flood of people coming in. And, we were able to rent our house out. I think it got booked a year in advance, by people that wanted to come down and be here for Christmas and New Year's. And that's what a lot of the expats do, is they will rent their house out at the peak tourist season, they'll go somewhere else and let somebody else use their place here in Nosara, and make a little bit of money, or have a free vacation, like that kind of thing.
Gotcha. Okay. Very interesting. It sounds like a really nice place for the family to call home. And so are you
Yeah.
guys planning on, I know you only plan for 1 year, 1 year's forever, but is this home for right now, or are there itchy feet expecting to go somewhere in the near future?
We expect to go everywhere in the near future.
That's a great mentality. Uh,
Our sort of like our ideal plan would be to be here in Costa Rica for about 6 months of the year. And this would be like home base. This is where our homeschool groups are. This is where our dog is. Like this is home. And then we would go ideally, when travel fully opens up again. We get a rainy season here in May, and April you have Easter. So we would leave here for Easter and for the rainy part of the season, and go back to Bali, because April and May is beautiful in Bali. So let's go there and hang out there for a little while, and then come back here for a month or so, then go up to the States, do summer camp in the US for a month or two. I'm one of 6 kids. So I get to see all my brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews and everything. The kids get to know all their cousins and everything. And then we'd come back down here, we'd kick off the school year, and then leave again because there's a second rainy season in October, and travel around Europe for a couple weeks in October, because that's a really nice time to be there. It's not too hot. There aren't too many tourists, things like that. So that's our plan for the next 12 months. And we're just trying to see how it works with COVID and travel restrictions and stuff like that, to see if we can open it up.
That's your plan for forever, apparently. 12
Yeah.
months. You've got it all locked down. The rest of your life is already mapped out. um, it sounds so perfect. It's what so many people that come on the show are aspiring to work up to. It's something that a very similar path is something that I would like to do, because I would like to be able to spend more time back home with friends and family from back home, and then also more time traveling and have a home base or two. And I know a lot of people are trying to work towards that. I'm curious. I want to ask so many questions about those next steps, but before we leave Costa Rica, what, generally speaking, not trying to ask you to be a visa expert, but just generally speaking, what is the process like for an American that might want to move to the U.S.? And also, I will kind of piggyback on that and say only about 30 or 40% of our audience, 40 to 50% is going to come from the U.S. So there's a big population from Europe and other parts of the world that are listening and might be interested as well. So anything that you could share about the general process for arriving to Costa Rica and then staying beyond that would be useful.
Sure. So there's a lot of different visa programs here. There you have a visa program for pensioners. So, if you're on Social Security or you have some sort of pension income, you can apply for residency saying, hey, I'm taken care of because I have this pension income. There's an investor visa, which basically says, I will come and spend, I don't remember the exact number. I think it's $250,000 on an investment in Costa Rica. And then that allows you to get a residency card here in Costa Rica. There's also a new digital nomad visa that I don't know anything about. This is brand new, and we've been traveling, so I haven't been paying attention to it. But I'm sure if you Google that, people can find that. And what a lot of people do is just do it the old-fashioned way, where they come on a 90-day tourist visa, and then when their tourist visa is expiring, they go somewhere else. So people will take a trip up to Nicaragua. If you've never been to Nicaragua, Nicaragua is amazing. It's a fantastic country. A lot of people do a visa run up there. You go to Granada for a couple of days. You go to San Juan del Sur. You go surfing for a couple of days. Or they'll go somewhere else. You can fly up to Miami if you're missing the States a little bit, or if you need to do some shopping or something like that. You can fly to Colombia. You can fly to wherever you want to go, really. So that's how most people here do it. Like a lot of people, if they're coming down here and they're thinking, I'm going to be here for a long time, They'll buy a property and they'll do the investor visa that way. And then if they're not sure how they want to set it up, like there's a couple new co-working spaces opening up in our town here. And I imagine we're going to have a flood of people coming down here on the 90-day visa saying, hey, I just want to try it on. I don't want to commit to anything. I want to see what life is like here. I'll give it 30 days, 90 days. And if I like it, maybe I'll do the Nicaragua road trip and come back on a new visa. And if I don't, I'll go somewhere else. Historically speaking, the Costa Rican government's been very cool with that and hasn't minded people on that perpetual tourist visa thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my understanding. I spent some time in Costa Rica as well, and just on a tourist visa, and over in Puerto Viejo, I think on the other side of the country, if I'm not mistaken. And anyway, I've met a lot of people doing that. There were Americans or Canadians living there for years, and I was like, "Oh, how do you stay?" And they're like, "Yeah, I just cross the border every 90 days and spend a day or two in another country, and then come back and no problems." I'm curious to see if with the emergence of these digital nomad visas and more remote work focused visas that actually try to account for these people. I'm wondering if that leniency will change as governments start to think, well, maybe I should be collecting some tax revenue off these people or something. So it'll be interesting. I don't know if you have any perspective on that, being that you're in that world, sort of.
I think that that's coming, but it's not here yet. Like, I think right now, a lot of countries are thinking, hey, we just want them here spending money. If we can get a bunch of people from countries that earn higher salaries than the people here, and they come here and they're spending that money here all the time, just that alone is going to help boost up our economy. But you're right. I totally think that at some point they're going to say, hey, we got a nice boost to the economy from that. I bet we'd get an even better boost if we start taxing people for being here. And, like there's a couple things Americans can do to avoid double taxation. There's, the foreign tax credit. So if you're paying taxes to a foreign country, you can take a dollar for dollar tax credit on your U.S. taxes. If you're more in the digital nomad camp, you can use the foreign earned income exclusion to exclude, it's about $108,000 of income from your U.S. taxes. And you have certain things you have to do and criteria you have to meet in order to qualify for that. But it's going to come down the pipe at some point where people are going to say, oh, like we really like having these these perpetual tourists here, but they should be helping pay for the roads. They should be helping pay for, the infrastructure of the internet and, all these different things that they're consuming while they're here. And, I don't know how that's all going to play out, but it's going to be interesting to watch it. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if there's not a blockchain solution to it. So, like, I'm not a big crypto person or anything like that. I'm just starting to learn more about it because basically my kids are getting interested in it, so I have to stay ahead of them and or try to stay ahead of them.
You can't be the one at the table that doesn't know the crypto lingo, right? Like, Dad, you're the money guy. Come on, you got to know this stuff.
Right, but there's all these different solutions that are coming through on blockchain. And I wouldn't be surprised at some point, like at the corporate level, they're reaching this agreement about a minimum global tax on corporations. I wouldn't be surprised that at some point in the future, they try and do something similar on the personal income tax level and say, we just want to make sure that globally people are paying, a reasonable amount to wherever they are. And we're going to use blockchain to track where they are. And some of these technologies, you can have the money come automatically through the blockchain, which would be an interesting solution.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. That would really simplify things for those of us that have complicated it for ourselves by moving around to different countries. I can tell you when we talk about like where it's going and what governments are going to do, Spain here, for instance, has had this visa that I'm on, which is basically set up for pensioners, like you described. Essentially, if you have a fixed income, which used to just be base pensioners, and you weren't working, essentially, you could come live here and spend that Social Security money, that pension money here, and they were fine with that. But then it started applying to remote workers because it was the same concept. Oh, you have a fixed income coming from another country. You're not going to come here and take a job from a local. So
Hmm.
sure, come here and spend that money, and that's fine. But now they're although that visa still exists and nothing's changed about that visa, they're no longer, from what I hear. I'm lucky. I'm so far into it. I'm 4 years into having mine that I don't have to reapply for it again. But even though they know exactly what I'm doing and what I like, I've had to have like letters from my company to say, here's what he's doing. I've had to show my bank statements showing here's how much I make every month,
Right.
deposits from my company. They're saying to new people applying, oh, no, you don't fit that criteria. You need to go the digital nomad route, which has a whole bunch of the digital nomad visa route, which has a whole bunch of tax implications and other issues. So they are
Yeah.
definitely going to try to adjust for this huge wave of remote workers that's coming to all these destinations around the world.
Yeah. No, it's gonna happen at some point, and then it's gonna be a game of cat and mouse with some people for a while, I imagine. Because if you can work from anywhere, if you can travel around at will, maybe what people will do is say, hey, if you're in the EU, most EU countries, it's if you're inside the country for 183 days, you become taxable in that country. So you're going to have a lot of people spending 6 months in Europe and then 6 months somewhere else, so that they are tax free in both places, right? And then depending on how much you're earning, you'll use the foreign earned income exclusion to reduce your U.S. tax liability. And all of a sudden, you have these people who are basically doing what some of these big corporations are have been doing for years. GE, Facebook, Google, like trying to set themselves up in multiple jurisdictions to confuse who's supposed to be taxing them, and getting your tax rate down to as close to zero as you can get it. Um, and then what I've seen with people, because we talk to a lot of people about this, is this little light bulb that goes on over somebody's head, right? So it's like, let's say you make $100,000 a year, and you figure out, hey, I can get that completely tax free. I'm still paying into Social Security, so I'm still paying my FICA taxes and all that kind of stuff. And all I have to do is travel a certain amount, and I'll save $25,000, $30,000 a year in tax. Well, that $25,000 or $30,000 a year then becomes your travel fund, and so all of a sudden you're like, people's eyes light up when they hear this, because it's like, wait a minute, you mean that instead of me paying this money in tax, I'm going to be able to spend this money on travel and Airbnbs and moving and living and seeing the world, and people just get like super excited by that. And like that's about as close to Santa as I get, is having that conversation with somebody for the first time and just watching them like, oh my goodness, this is amazing.
Well, can I tell you a really, this is both a funny story and a compliment at the same time. I had that moment with my Greenback Tax accountant years ago, 7 years ago or 8 years ago, when I was trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to pay for these double taxation while trying to change up my career and go live in Ecuador and figure all this other crap out. And now I also got to figure out how to pay taxes in two different places. So I get on the phone with this company called Greenback Tax that I've never heard of, but they say they help Americans with taxes abroad. And I go, okay, what's this guy going to tell me? And he starts explaining all these things, the foreign earned income tax exclusion, the tax credits, all this stuff. And my eyes lit up like Christmas, like, wait a second. So that means I can take that money and spend it on travel instead. And it was so cool to see that this was actually like baked into the into our tax code, and in fact, for people listening that aren't from the US, yes, that is all true, but actually the US has it, most of us, I think, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, we have it kind of worse off, although all that's true, than most
Yeah.
people from those other countries, except for the three that you mentioned where we're in company with North Korea and the US, and Eritrea, right? Is that correct?
Eritrea. Little
Eritrea.
country in Africa.
Eritrea. So those three countries are the only ones that tax their citizens while they live abroad. So the rest of you that don't live in the U.S., you don't even have to worry about that little, what is it, about 14.5%, 15% FICA. So I don't know. It's a very interesting, a pretty exciting thing when you start doing the math.
I went to a conference one time, and one of the presenters was a guy from New Zealand, and he was presenting on how he became a zero tax individual. And like everybody, like I would say 80% of the people in the room were American. And I presented at the conference, a tax attorney presented at that conference, a couple other people. And we've got 30-page PowerPoint presentations explaining different corporate structures and all this kind of stuff. This guy gets up there; it's a 3-page PowerPoint. He's like, "First, I went to this office, and it's a picture of the building, and I filled out this form, and it was like a 1-page form. It's like I dropped it off. I asked them if they needed anything else. They said yes. If or when you ever come back to New Zealand, fill out this form." And they handed him another form. And he's like, and then I moved to Thailand, and now I don't pay tax anywhere in the world. So
I love and hate this guy right now so much.
If you're not an American, this might be significantly better for you.
Yeah, exactly. Can you explain that to me? What is the logic behind, if there is any, other than just we want our money, but like, how does the U.S. government get away with, I guess, in a way, saying that this makes sense that you continue to pay this 14 or 15% regardless of where you are in the world, while all the rest of the countries in the world go a different route?
Oh, geez. I don't know that there's any easy way to answer that. I believe that at the end of World War I, that's when they instituted a tax on people living outside the country. And so that's kind of when it started. And for a long time, nobody really paid attention to it, and a lot of people didn't do anything with it. Then what happened was people started getting worried about all the bank secrecy stuff, money in offshore accounts, money funding terrorist organizations, things like that. So post 9/11, you had a lot of things come out where they're trying to track down the money and they're running into dead ends. And so the government started clamping down on Americans specifically, saying, okay, since the 1970s, we've had this law in the books about reporting foreign bank accounts. And now we're going to track you down if you don't do it. We haven't, it's been on the books. Nobody cared for a long time, but now we're paying attention and we're going to track you down. So, if anybody out there is an American living overseas, if you have a foreign bank account and you have over $10,000 in that account or in all of your combined foreign accounts, you have to report that to the IRS or to the Treasury Department. Then they started with, FATCA. And basically they're saying, okay, if you look in the media, you have a lot of stuff about expats are all rich people, they're tax cheats, they're moving overseas to avoid taxation and do all this kind of stuff. Now, you and I know that most expats are normal people who are just trying to do something a little bit different and still make a living and all that. But that's the way the media portrays it. So when you have legislation going through saying we're going to make it harder for these tax cheats and stuff like that, there's people that raise red flags. But because expats aren't able to vote as a group, like when expats vote, our vote gets mailed into the last state that we lived in, and then it just gets diluted with everybody else that lives in that state. So we don't, in my opinion, have a wonderful voice in the government to say, hey, guys, you're making our lives unnecessarily complex here. And, this is all a bunch of nonsense. What is it? Like, I've seen numbers saying, between 3 and 9 million Americans living abroad. That would make us a pretty big state. We'd be like 15th, 17th biggest state with those kind of numbers. We would have representation in government if we're able to vote as a block, but we're not able to do that. And since we're not able to do that, nobody pays attention, nobody cares. And so they can just keep making these rules more complex and more onerous for people like you and I. And it's unfortunate because it dissuades a lot of people, or a lot of people get in trouble for doing things that seem pretty normal but outside the U.S.
Yeah.
So like all the time we see people who are trying to save for retirement, and they try and save for retirement in vehicles that look like IRAs or Roth IRAs in the US, but they're doing it in a foreign country because that's where they're earning the money. And some of that stuff is viewed as foreign trusts by the IRS, and so there's special reporting for that. Some of the investments are viewed as PFICs, passive foreign investment companies. So there's a whole host of different rules around that people are constantly getting in trouble with. Sometimes in different countries, the property rules are different. And so you buy and sell property differently than you would in the US. So, for example, in Indonesia, we set up a company to buy a lease on a house because that helped with the visa and things like that. And so once you set up a company in a foreign country, you have to report that to the IRS. So that company becomes an entity that needs to be reported on its own to the IRS. Failure to do so carries minimum fines that start at $10,000 a year. So you imagine you're somebody that moves to, just say Costa Rica. Down here, pretty much everybody sets up a corporate entity to buy their property. And the reason they do that is so that when they're overseas, they can have their attorney handle the property for them. So if they want to sell it or they need a new roof, they can have an attorney manage that process for them. If it was owned in their name, they wouldn't be able to manage that stuff because they're outside the country. So here, everybody buys their property via an entity, and we're constantly talking to people and meeting people, and eventually they find out what we do. Eventually they start asking a couple questions, and eventually it comes out that their friend hasn't been filing their taxes, and you start having a conversation about what their friend needs to do.
And, quotation marks for those
air
of you
quotes for those who can't see. And an hour or so into that conversation, it comes out that they own a home and they own it through a Costa Rican entity. And usually that's the biggest sticking point for people because they haven't been reporting that corporate entity. And so, it's all these complexities that the government's made to tax who they consider to be tax cheats, but they're written in such a way that they're really impacting a lot of very middle-class people living overseas, even pensioners. Like, I've seen pensioners get into trouble with this, with PFICs and stuff like that, just because they were trying to save for retirement. And so, it can be a major headache, a major hassle for people going overseas. And I spoke to somebody yesterday, and they had just moved here to Nosara, and they were saying, okay, I want to understand what we need to do on the U.S. tax side of things so I don't get myself in trouble. And I was like, that is genuinely the smartest thing you could do. Most people come to us 3 years after they've gotten here and they're already in trouble. And you and I are going to have a 1 hour conversation, and we're going to save you from getting in trouble. So I would recommend to anybody that's thinking about moving abroad or anybody that is abroad, just get educated on this. Understand what you need to do. And obviously I'm impartial. I think we're the best company to do it. We've got a great blog. We've got a ton of webinars and stuff like that people can join when we're doing them live, or you can jump on one of the ones that we have on YouTube or on our website. But just get yourself educated, know what the rules are, and that knowledge then becomes power, right? Mm-hmm. That knowledge is then how you turn that into that Christmas moment where you're thinking, hey, if I do this the right way, I now understand these rules, and I can turn my $20,000 or $30,000 of annual tax into a $20,000 or $30,000 annual travel fund, and live the life that nobody gets to live. And that's what people can do if they do a little bit of research, if they talk to an expert. and just make sure they know the rules, make sure they understand how it all works, and it's liberating. Yeah,
Yeah.
like literally, like mentally liberating, but geographically liberating as well.
It is. That's an excellent point to make. It is liberating, and it doesn't have to be something that holds you back. It can actually be something that propels you forward if you get educated and figure out how to make this whole system work for you, not against you. And I've said this on the show like a million times, but I'm just such a big advocate of outsourcing the things that we're not good at, and most of us are not good at this kind of thing, unless you're an accountant. And this is a very niche area when you're talking about international taxes. If you're not an expert in this and you've got other complexities in your life, if you're exploring moving to another country, this is probably not an area to cut corners. Like you could actually not just cost yourself money in the end by not knowing what you're doing and getting penalized, but you could also be propelling yourself forward with some opportunities that you miss if you don't do it correctly. So I'm a huge fan of outsourcing this sort of thing, hiring somebody that is a pro, and it pays for itself many times over, in my opinion. So I personally endorse Greenback Tax as well, because I'm a happy customer. But we're 2 for 2 on this show currently that advocate for Greenback Tax. But we will have links in the show notes directly to Greenback Tax, as well as to anywhere else that they can find you, David. This has been super fun. I was really excited to get you on the show, and I learned a lot, both about Costa Rica, about your background, and then about the tax codes and stuff as well. So super useful. Where else can people find you? And again, we'll link to all this in the show notes, but while people are listening, it would be great for them to know where they can learn more.
Yeah, just greenbacktaxservices.com. That's our main gig. That's where we spend most of our time.
Perfect. Thank you. And is there anything else you want to share, either about Costa Rica or about some of the things that we've discussed today that the listeners should know?
Well, one thing I was thinking about, and I was listening to some of your podcasts earlier, and so one of the ideas that we've had for a long time is that if you stop and you evaluate your situation, usually your worst case situation is the one you're in. And so if you take some of these risks, if you take a calculated risk and you move to Spain or you move to Costa Rica, or you just go for 3 months to try it out to see if you enjoy working remotely and doing that kind of thing, your BATNA, your best alternative to the negotiated arrangement, is just to go back to what your life was, right? I could move back to New York and get a banking job. I could do those kind of things. And I think that's another really liberating idea for people is, if you're kind of stuck in a rut and you're thinking, like this isn't great, that's not great, you could just jump somewhere else, see if that improves things. And if it doesn't, you can go right back to where you were. And, maybe you have to buy a little bit of new furniture. Maybe you have to find a new lease on an apartment or something like that. But it's not overly complicated. It's not going back is easier than, or it's a lower risk than never trying, in my opinion.
That's such a good point. And I don't think anybody, I don't know, you've traveled around a lot. You've lived in a lot of different countries, presumably met a lot of expats. You guys employ expats and your clients are expats. Do you ever really meet anybody that just really regrets it? I mean, sure, there's the edge case here and there, but like for the most part, people just genuinely come away going, that at least I find, going, I'm glad I made that decision. Even if that decision is to move back, they learned something about themselves. But almost never do I hear the story that like, I took that leap of faith. I moved to Uruguay for a year and it was the worst decision in my life. Never hear that story.
I only hear stuff like that from people who get sent abroad as opposed to people who choose
Yeah.
it voluntarily. But even, with a little bit of time, most of those people remember it fondly as well. Because, you're always going to have like pain points, right? Figuring out where you pay your electric bill or, where you can buy the breakfast cereal your kids like, things like that are pain points for people when they go overseas. Now, sometimes they turn into great things where all of a sudden, your kids go from eating Cocoa Puffs to eating something better in a new place. or sometimes, people don't adjust that well and they don't really like it. But eventually they look back on it fondly thinking, oh, that was such an adventure. It was such a positive time in my life. And I think where I've seen that is military spouses and things like that who, they didn't get a say in where they were going. And, maybe you're somebody that would love to live in Italy, but instead you got sent to South Korea. And so, it's that wasn't really what I wanted. But, most of the time people that go abroad, it is an awakening experience. It's you get to see how other people do things. You're constantly learning and growing as a person. And, from most of the people I see, that tends to be positive and something that they don't want to give up.
That is 100% true. I would absolutely agree. That's a fantastic way to wrap this up. I have a million more questions. I wish we had just endless time, but this was great. Thank you so much, David. I know you're busy and really appreciate the time. And thank you guys for all the great work that you do and for being a leader in the remote work space. You guys are employing people around the world. We didn't even get to that during this discussion, so maybe that's chapter 2. But really, thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. It's great.
Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. For those of you wondering how you can best support the show, I have made it super simple for you. Just go over to the show notes of the episode that you just finished listening to and click on one of the 2 following links. aboutabroad.com/newsletter to get our monthly newsletter, no spam, guaranteed, or ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, where you can quickly and easily leave a review for the show. It's not just important to me, it also helps more wanderers just like you find us. Finally, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, and we will see you again next week. Thanks again. Hasta luego, amigos.